Joining us now to break down what the numbers mean, or if they even matter, is Cassie Smedile, the Deputy Communications Director for the Republican National Committee. Cassie, we just went through some of the numbers that are being expressed right now in polling. Of course, there's been a little bit of pushback behind the tactics that are used. But when we look at polling right now, what should our viewers know about where we stand?
Well, of course, the only polls that matter are the polls on Election Day. And historically, this far out, it's always anybody's game. And then add on top of that a pandemic, and you've got a really cloudy picture of what people are actually thinking. But what we know, and what you and I have talked about a lot before, is whether it's virtual or in person, which we're transitioning back to, the enthusiasm is really off the charts. We've got an unprecedented number of people signing up to volunteer, to make phone calls, to host MAGA meetups. That far outpaces what we saw in 16. And again, just look at this week with the primaries in Georgia and West Virginia. Not only did President Trump outdo his numbers from 16, he outdid Hillary's, he outdid Obama's from his reelection year, Bush's from his reelection year. So we're really seeing, when you get right down to it and people go to cast their vote, unprecedented enthusiasm for President Trump and Republicans.
And polls are one of those things, too. For example, I mean, we cited those polls before. Gallup right now has the president low in the polls. But then you could look at an Ipsos Reuters poll right now that has the president surging. So really, you could kind of differentiate numbers, manipulate them, if you will, to really make whatever narrative you're looking to do. And that is what the Trump campaign says that CNN did to some degree. I mean, we see that only 25% of respondents were Republican in that latest poll, resulting in a cease and desist letter. What do you make of the way that maybe some of the methodology behind some of these polling, such as the one used by CNN?
That's right. You absolutely should always scroll to the bottom and look at the methodology anytime you see a poll. We should just do that for ourselves as interested and engaged Americans. But I think you also have to wonder, why are they doing that, especially after the huge embarrassment that pollsters and everybody who pushed these polls suffered in 2016? You would think that there would be an honest effort to want to do better and be better. But they're so insistent on pushing their anti-Trump narrative that they would go to great lengths to make it a lopsided demographic, or do, just registered voters as opposed to likely voters, which is at their own peril and their own peril of their credibility.
And I think it's also important to note right now, too, that the polling that we're looking at is during the moment that we're looking at. I mean, you mentioned that the November election is about 5 months away. Just a couple of weeks ago, we thought that coronavirus was going to be the big headline, that people were going to make their decisions based off that. Now here we are a couple weeks later, I guess you could say, and it looks like the protests taking place across the country and police reforms may be the issue. We're still 5 months away. I mean, neither of these things will likely be the issue on voters' minds when they come out to the polls. So when we get to November, what does the Trump campaign want the issue to be?
Well, certainly the number one issue always, regardless of the outer context happening, is the economy. And right behind that, always national security, whether that's at home or abroad. So what the conversation, whether it resembles what the headlines look like today, 5 months from now, I think the larger conversation will stay the same. Are people employed? Do people have the ability to pay their bills, put food on the table, save a little money for their retirement? These are all things that we were doing at historic pace and with historically great numbers prior to the pandemic, certainly prior to the protests. And then you look at last week's jobs numbers out of nowhere, leaving economists absolutely baffled. 2.5 million jobs added in May. But for those who have been great beneficiaries of the Trump policies, they weren't surprised, because we had a really strong economy going into all of this. And so all of the foundation, the strong foundation, is there. And the president, through PPP and holding tight to the deregulation and the tax cuts, has set up an environment that allows people to spring back into a prosperous economy and a prosperous community. And that's what we hope we'll continue to see as we head towards November, but of course, as we head beyond that, because that's what's important to people's lives and livelihoods.
And I think as we come out of some of these hardships, I think if the president can look back and say, I guided the country through a pandemic, I guided us through those protests, we even made some police reforms, which he said that he's at least open to. I think if he can do that and the economy is building back, he's going to be very hard to beat going into 2020, because in 2016, he was campaigning, I should say, on those promises. If he has results to back them up in 2020, it's going to be a very difficult path for the Biden campaign. But Cassie Smedile, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.